Today's Rethink Act is with Hannah Jewell for We Need Snowflakes. So the term snowflake really took off both in the UK and in the US around sort of 2015, 2016, this sort of political moment shortly before the Brexit referendum and the election of Donald Trump in the US. Through mainstream media, then platforming figures of the alt-right, like Richard Spencer in the US, Milo Yiannopoulos, who is in the UK and the US, they're being invited onto like Channel 4 news, onto the BBC, and they're participating in these debates where the sort of point is that the anchor is often there to sort of challenge them and critique their opinions. One of them was invited to debate whether or not women were like smart enough, are our brains big enough to do science? These sort of debates that are meant to sort of ridicule them, but end up legitimating them. And because you have viewers who are watching these kinds of debates and they start to think like, I actually do, like, although that person was challenged, like, that's a great way of putting it. I do hate snowflakes. Like, I do not like this. I do agree with them. You see then after the Brexit referendum in the UK, you see how the word snowflake is tossed around as a way to sort of delegitimize the genuine political beliefs and feelings of young and progressive people, not solely young or not solely progressive people, but mostly these people. By calling them snowflakes, they're no longer sort of like legitimate political actors, but their feelings have been recast as a character flaw. And it's a really effective sort of verbal tool because nobody does want to be seen as being too weak. Nobody wants to be like the snowflake figure. So a goal of this book was to sort of look at that, look at the origin of where this term came from, and to wonder, why are we so uncomfortable if we are being told we are showing too much emotion? Are we actually giving away political power by being sensitive to being called too sensitive? So I think that we romanticize the supposed resilience of older generations at our own peril. And I open this book with a look at the life and the childhood of my own grandmother, who grew up quite poor in London, who was a young woman during the Blitz, who lost friends and family in the war, and who had a sort of horrible, abusive father and lived in poverty and had this terrible time. You have the end product of her later. She's kind of the anti-snowflake, you would say. She would have hated this book. She would have been very proud of me for publishing a book, but she would have hated its entire concept because to her, she was how people should be. She was totally emotionally repressed. She could not express love. She expressed pride for us in other ways, but she was not able to ever deal with her pain. And I've come to realize how much the things that we romanticize about supposedly resilient older generations are actually sort of the symptoms of untreated trauma. And that when someone deals with any hardship, if the only option to them, as was the case for my grandma, is to totally bottle it up inside, not think about it, repress it, you end up repressing like the great parts of life too, and the feeling and the emotion. Those who are standing up for themselves, fighting for social justice, that takes a large amount of resilience. And it's not framed that way because it makes older people uncomfortable. And it's much easier to say, you should not feel anything. You should not talk about your pain, which is often a political pain. Like all pain has a political, cause, or that can cause it, or that can be pursued afterwards, and activism that comes out of the pain of how people are treated because of their race, their sexuality, gender, and so on. That is resilience to fight for those causes. We need to redefine what resilience means. So when there is productive and healthy conversation across this sort of culture war divide and across political feeling across generations, I don't think it happens online most of the time. It's not that it can't happen online, but I think that it more often happens in person. And a time that I witnessed this in a way that surprised me was when I went to cover as a journalist the protest outside of the National Rifle Association headquarters, the NRA headquarters near Washington, where there was a protest being hosted by the classmates of those who were killed in the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas high school shooting in Parkland, Florida in 2018. And that summer they embarked on this nationwide tour trying to change gun laws. And this protest had, the anti-gun crowd on one side and the like NRA conservatives on the other. And some of the girls sort of crossed this physical barrier. And so I followed them to sort of record them and to interview them with their permission, I should say. And you had this this really conservative teen girl who I now sort of follow on Twitter, and I follow her progress into like Trumpism and so on, and how she's this like really passionate like Trumpian activist. And these two girls who came from Parkland, Florida, and from other schools around the country that have had shootings, who are anti-NRA. And I saw them sort of start to sort of fight, and then kind of weirdly find things that they had in common in person, to kind of, you sort of saw how, especially the conservative girl went from being really like, I hate you all, you're all stupid and not patriotic and so on, to being less willing to say that face to face to these other teenage activists. And then you had these sort of older guys who came, and they were less willing to kind of, they wanted to yell at the Parkland kids. But even with them, they sort of came to admit, I guess the NRA has changed over time, and it used to be like a sporting like hunters association. And I saw this very unexpected interaction, and I thought this would never have happened on Twitter, on Facebook, wherever. I think that these fights that are online are so toxic so much of the time. I think that really important stuff happens there. People get a voice on social media that they wouldn't have necessarily otherwise. That is indispensable. But I think minds don't necessarily get changed there. And I respect so much, like, when there are like baby boomers, for example, who connect the radicalism of the young today to their own radical youths in the 60s, when they respect that and see that that is not something different, when they have self-awareness to say, maybe I think these kids are too crazy, but isn't that what my parents thought about me? I think that that is an opportunity for healthy dialogue that I hope can happen more often.